All right, welcome everybody to the Tuesday evening screencast coaching call. My name's Naylor. I'll be your host tonight, and we're going to forego some of the pre-done content. Our topic for tonight was on video resources. I'm going to touch on that, but I'm going to do it in conjunction with something that TechSmith announced earlier this week, and it had to do with a big announcement. And so I wanted to see about maybe talking about what they have going on a little bit. So to kind of kick that off, I'll start off with just a couple of points here, and we'll see what it all entails. Essentially, they announced a new version of Camtasia, the next major release of Camtasia. And one of the things is, you'll notice here I have Camtasia 9, and that was kind of an assumption. We'll talk about why that might not exactly be correct in just a minute. First of all, they have made it public that under the covers are going to be a couple of improvements in the software itself. Probably the most major of those is that Camtasia 9 will be 64-bit. In other words, it will incorporate the entire memory address space of all the modern operating systems. Currently, it's only a 32-bit app, which means, mathematically speaking, it can only access about 4 gigabytes of RAM if you have it. And the operating system, at least Windows, reserves something on the order of a gigabyte or better of that just to run. So the software can't really take advantage of a computer, for example, that has 6, 8, 12 gigabytes of RAM. None of that really did you any good as far as performance goes when running Camtasia in the past. So now the new version will basically be what's called 64-bit, which means it's a more powerful system, faster, because it can use more system resources and accessible memory than before. Just be aware that for all intents and purposes, the way the software is designed, it looks like being 64-bit is rather going to be a good kind of a thing. Susan asked, does 64-bit versus 34-bit refer to memory? I always thought it was CPU processing power. It can be both, Susan, but primarily from a program standpoint, it has to do with memory. And like I mentioned before, what's called the address space. In other words, how much space or how much memory can an application access that's available, right? So being 32-bit, like I mentioned, the math just doesn't equal anywhere near what a 64-bit engine can access, right? So there you go on that. In the software world and under the covers of Camtasia, this is kind of a big deal. And hopefully it'll lead to all different kinds of things like improved performance, better previewing, better system reliability. If you've ever had Camtasia crash, a lot of times it's due to running out of resources or other programs that are running competing for that limited memory that's available. And so something steps on somebody else and boom, there you go. You're done. You're over. It should render faster and all kinds of yummy technical goodness. So there you go. And also one of the other things they talked about was now we can record high dots per inch video displays. So in other words, if you have one of the newer 4K video displays, you can now record and edit those higher resolution videos. So that's kind of sweet. Not that I'm currently using that technology, but there you have it. I also was able to glean from the TechSmith Facebook page, and I'll show you that in just a minute also. They are kind of jumping in and answering a few select questions, and I can verify that they have stated on their page that there will be no 60 frames per second support at release. So that's something that a lot of people were really kind of looking for. It certainly is on the plate, but it's not going to make it into the initial release. Right? Probably the biggest thing that you're going to see and notice is that they have completely changed the interface on the Windows platform. And we'll kind of jump over and walk through some of their video stuff in just a minute, and I'll point out a few of the relevant things, some of the things that are different, and how we might have to think a little bit differently about how we work inside of Camtasia. Another thing that is apparently a big deal to a lot of people, but I really couldn't care less, has to do with cross-platform parity, and that is a term in the software industry which basically means that the software looks, acts, feels, and interoperates between, in most cases, it means the PC or Windows platform and the Mac platform. So they will have feature parity. For example, the Mac users will now get things like quizzes, library, and grouping, and things like that. On the PC side, what we'll see is that it looks a whole lot more like the Mac version than it did the current Windows version. So we'll take a look at that for just a bit. Another big thing that they hit during the launch was new assets. So basically, what you find in your library will be pretty much swapped out. A bunch of new video backgrounds that really are not lame. And most of the callouts have gone from the rather cheesy looking kinds of older design things to what's called a flat design, which are pretty nice. They really look better, especially in more up-to-date kinds of video work and whatnot. They also tout a new music library of tracks. They've been replaced with what they call fresh new tracks, and I'll go ahead and say that they're pretty good. I like them. And then also some others. Other things that they go ahead and add into the library in terms of assets as well. So just a little cue on that one. Right, just in time for graphic styles to change again with flat design callout, says Susan. They also did mention, however, Susan, that they would be having additional assets available that we could get online, kind of like you can do right now, but the ones that are on the library site haven't been updated since like 2013. So hopefully what will happen is they'll start to pack up more and more assets. And I don't know why they don't do this in general anyway. I've railed on this before. Dear TechSmith, dear Microsoft and PowerPoint, why do you not provide us with hundreds and thousands of assets that we can use? Right? It's just ridiculous. So I have provided that, I'll call it passionate feedback to TechSmith for about 2 years now. So we'll kind of see what happens there. In the video, they say that they priced it out, and the new assets that are in the library are worth over $1,000. So I guess we'll have to see what the final rollout looks like. I don't know where they buy their assets from, but let's just say that I would have a little bit of indigestion being worth $1,000. So we'll just leave it at that. Another very cool thing is something called behaviors, and it's essentially pre-configured animations. If you think like in PowerPoint, you can create rather rich and complex animations. And you can actually make them look cool. Things like elastic text, and words coming in by letters and things like that. These are basically what they call behaviors. And you can assign behaviors to text or to pretty much any objects, except for music, of course, or audio on the timeline. So you can take some of the other assets like the flat design callouts and icons and do pre-configured animations to them. The lead tech that did the demo said that was by far his new favorite feature. So I would have to tend to agree with him based on what I've seen so far. There are also new ways to handle properties. I'll kind of explain what that is and how it's going to affect us as Camtasia video creators, so that'll be a little bit interesting. Chief among those, and they also mentioned this, was that there is now a new way to edit text, and it has to do with just managing the properties of the text. If you are familiar with the current Camtasia text editing capabilities and have ever been frustrated at how incredibly weak and lame it is, then this is certainly a major step up from that. Okay, and they also talk about being able to do a lot more work on the canvas directly, which I think is a good thing also. Okay, so let's kind of jump out of slides. So just watching the intro, what you'll notice is that there are some major differences in the way the software looks right out of the gate. It's got a new flat design feel to it. So that part is certainly more modern. In general, and I've provided this feedback, I find it a little bit dark. And the only thing that kind of makes me leery of that is when I think of my experience with Adobe software products, which all look like this. You know, Adobe Premiere, Adobe After Effects. They all kind of have this same type of feel to it, if you will. And it's probably just in my head, but it feels more complicated just by virtue of the color and the layout and the design and stuff. Thankfully, that's not truly the case. I think once we start to look at the release version and see, you know, how to get around in it and things like that, hopefully my reservations will kind of disappear on that. I'm not really going to talk much about the Mac side because I don't use it, I don't know it, and we don't support it here at Learn Camtasia. So, in fact, let's just jump over to the Facebook page right now. If you guys don't know this, there is a Camtasia Studio Facebook page. It's got about 82,000 people in it is all. And aside from all the trolls and haters, what you'll find, how many comments are there on this now? There were a couple hundred comments before. You hear all kinds of people railing on and, oh, are we going to get a free upgrade and I'll pay $50 for it or whatever. My guess is that that's not going to happen. If I'm a software company, I don't spend 4 years developing a new version and then give it away for free. That's just my take. All right, so here we have Matt Johnson. Matt's he's the product marketing manager. He's not one of the developers, but Matt's a nice guy, and they come in and they start talking about a few different things. So and I just want to make a couple of points about it. You'll see that there is no longer a ribbon, what they call a ribbon in Camtasia 8. This guy right here, it's now basically all controlled kind of in a much more, like I say, Adobe fashion of things that you can do in categories, right? And then when you click each one of these different categories, then you get a set of stuff that's related to it. For example, the first one here is media, and when you click media, for example, you get your media bin, which is the clip bin, and also a tab then for the library. So for us as users, I mean, that's not too much of a departure. This doesn't really cause me much in the way of heartburn, right? So media, oh, okay, that's where my clip bin and my library are. Okay, so instead of clicking these two guys, you can, just kind of navigate this way. And then there's annotations, transitions, and other things that we would expect to see. So that's all, not too bad. The canvas area is quite a bit more useful as far as doing stuff right on the canvas. And that's one of the things that they mention. Let's kind of move ahead a little bit here. They demo some of the new assets. These, for example, are some of the new video backgrounds. And I have to say that they are not lame, right? Really kind of interesting. They actually are fairly useful. And you can watch a little bit of a preview and demo here, as opposed to the 70s acid trip junk they were getting from Digital Juice. These are clean, and they are representative much more of the kinds of assets that we could go out and buy and spend a whole lot less than $1,000 for. I'll show you some of those resources in just a little bit. But yeah, actually pretty nice and useful. The other kinds of assets that they touted here were some of the lower thirds. Again, we see a nice flat design, and we can basically modify these, of course. They work pretty much like any other assets in the library, except these have animation to them. So consequently, they are made up of different elements, text and different shapes, and they're animated. So when we find them in the library, they will be grouped, right? So to modify these, you'll do it like any other little more complex thing we might find in the library. My point being that let's just maybe jump to one of the existing ones. So for example, a call out here really is just an image with a single, not even animation, just a transition, right? Well, these bad boys actually have multiple layers and multiple animations, which makes them cooler. Now, we kind of create some of these kinds of things ourselves, and in fact, I do that in my Screencast Pro course. Let's see, is Ron on the line today? Yeah, Mr. Ron Hogue is with us tonight. He shows how to make your own assets like this in his Camtasia Mastery course, so it's not rocket science, but, if they're going to include them in the library, I guess that's kind of cool. So they seem to think that these were pretty hip and happening. I kind of agree. They're nice. There's a decent selection of, they're called icons. Now, this is kind of where I get into the whole $10,000 worth of stuff, is that we're going to have to see how many icons and assets they give to us and whatnot. I mean, they're just icons. You can get hundreds of thousands of them in any number of the resources that Michelle and I talk about constantly. In fact, we can get animated icons and, all kinds of things. You've probably seen me recommend, use, and promote these for years if you've been on my lists and things. But the design is nice. Most of the controls are intuitive. There's nothing really to worry about there. Here's where they talk about the text editor. And that's going to kind of lead us into one of the other aspect of property management. But what you'll notice is that if I go to, let me just add a text call out on the timeline here. Okay, so on the left is TechSmith's currently incredibly hideous text editor. If you've ever tried to use this, then it's just a nightmare. Well, essentially all of this goes away, although we still have access to all the properties and all of that stuff. The difference being that all of the editing gets done right inside the preview window. It's kind of a big deal. One of the things that we really kind of want to do is to be able to add text and things like that easily. for everything from title screens to any time you want to use a text callout. And it's just been a total pain in the butt to do up until now. So this is kind of like a big deal, right? And at this point in the demo, they start to talk about what are called behaviors. So these are basically just, like I say, pre-configured animations. And they're pretty good. In the demo, you'll see that they kind of show some of it in action and whatnot. So behaviors are pretty interesting. Here is one of the other big things that we'll be working with, and it's called properties. So in Camtasia currently, if we go to just click on anything on the timeline, what you'll notice is that the way we work with properties now, so this is a rounded rectangle, and these are the properties. So there are properties for callouts. There are properties for audio on the audio tab. There are properties for visual properties, right? So it's a little bit confusing to some folks in how it works currently. But the secret sauce is that what happens in the new version is that all properties are controlled in a kind of centralized spot. So whatever you click on the timeline, you can dial down into a lot of different properties, including things like this says for animations as an example. So this is a behavior. You can tweak the behaviors as to when they come in, how long they last, how they go out. There's a lot of properties that we can now kind of work with. So there is not a lot of, flipping through tabs and stuff like that to get to different kinds of properties. So that's one of the biggest differences. It's also one of the most Adobe-like kinds of things. But it is certainly something that if you are fluent and proficient in Camtasia 8, this is going to hose you up for a little bit until you kind of get used to it.